David, you wanted to address the due process aspect of it. Do you feel that the bill as written has enough due process, or that it doesn't go far enough?
I think there are very serious due process questions. I mean, look, the bill, the way it's written, it's very clear that what they envision is orders being issued on a preliminary injunction or temporary restraining order basis. In other words, after just a preliminary hearing as opposed to a full judicial proceeding. And as a practical matter, what will happen when foreign-based websites are accused of being rogue sites under this legislation is they're not going to show up in U.S. court. They don't have lawyers here. They don't know or understand the U.S. legal system. They're not going to want to take on the expense of defending themselves. In some cases, that may be because they have no defense. They're just full on guilty. They're bad actors. In other cases, though, there might be a real defense, and it might be a situation where if you actually had both sides present their case, they'd be found to not be bad guys after all. But it's going to be very hard under this kind of structure to have an adversarial process. I think in most cases, a small website without a ton of revenues that's accused is just going to hop to a different domain name or try to evade because defending itself in court is just too cumbersome. So I think it's a hard problem figuring out how you really do a careful assessment of which sites are actually meeting whatever heightened definition you end up with in a bill that describes who the bad guys are.
Yeah, and David, I feel like the points that you're making about making sure that there's proper due process are right. I think it's really important for a lot of reasons that the sites that there's process against are sites that are really the bad guys and really engaged in bad behavior. The hope is that it's the same level of process that's required if they're going to seize your house for a drug crime. When the government goes in and does that, it's actually the same provisions of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure that apply here. I do think that you will, and everyone will lose their view of legitimacy in the minds of the public if the wrong sites are taken down. And we've seen how people act up, even, frankly, when bad guys are taken down, much less sites that are incorrect sites. So I think it's very important that it be the right ones.
We've also seen some mistakes in ICE seizures to date, and those have drawn a lot of attention. I think you're right.
There have been a couple.
And not only that, but even in takedown notices. So basically, even under the DMCA, media companies have been very aggressive in terms of giving takedown notices. Many times those are legitimate. Sometimes they're not, and people are aware of that. And so you're basically asking us to trust you, Viacom, and other media companies to sort of do the right thing.
Well,
and
wait.
Why should we trust you? And
okay, two things I need to answer on that one. First off, remember there's two sets of values going on here. Okay, one is you have an enormous industry, employs, depending on whose numbers you look at, 20 million people. Talking about more than half of the exports in the United States are involved in the media business, in intellectual property industries, right? This is a bill not just about movies and television shows, but about fake car parts and phony drugs and various kinds of trademark infringements and all kinds of other economic activity that we all view as very productive. So we view that as important. There is no legislation that has ever been passed in the history of the world that doesn't have some costs and some benefits. So every one of the costs that people view in connection with this needs to be weighed against the very important and very serious values. What we do hear from the other side is we all agree, very serious, very important values, but, and often what's on the other side of the but is either something that is addressable or it's a slippery slope argument, but there's never kind of an alternative, better approach that both solves problems and avoids issues. Here, there was discussion early on that people should rely on the entertainment industry and that we should have set up some neutral body that would help identify these pirate sites. But through these negotiations, it became a court. It became an Article III independent member of the judiciary whose job it is, just like we entrust our judges with questions about when can a search warrant be served, when can your property be served, when do you go to jail, when is bail required to be posted. It's the same processes. If we're not trusting in our government independent processes here, why should we ever trust them anywhere?